Hey everyone, and welcome back to Scary Tales. In case you're joining us for the first time, let me just say that if you're a fan of real people's accounts of dark and twisted tales, then you're in the right place. That's literally all that we do, and we upload twice a week. But before we get into today's story, I need you to take the like button and carefully plan your next move, because first, what you're going to do is write a letter explaining why you had to do this, and then send the like button on a one-way trip across the country under a brand new name. And then lay low for almost 2 decades, but make sure that no matter how long you hide, you don't ever contact it again. Because trust me, you're going to need that head start, because today's tale ends with one of the most unbelievable manhunts in modern history. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave a comment below. Tell me how stupid I am or whatever it is you want to say. I don't care. But everything that you do say will be taken into account and be used to improve the video. I appreciate all of you, and now on to today's tale. There was a man named John List, and he sat at his dining room table in his sprawling Victorian mansion, which was called Breeze Knoll in Westfield, New Jersey. It was an imposing home, a symbol of its success and stability with its towering gables, pristine stained glass, and ornate fixtures. But to anyone on the outside, John had it all. A beautiful wife, 3 children in private schools, a devout Christian household, and a career in accounting that once afforded his family the good life. But what people couldn't see was the slow disintegration of that perfect facade, because in reality, John's life has been spiraling out of control for a long time. He'd lost his job, and despite his polished appearance, financial ruin loomed over him like a specter. Proud and intensely religious, John believed that failure wasn't just a personal shortcoming, but it was a moral disgrace. And he couldn't allow his family to face the humiliation of losing everything. To him, the shame was too unbearable to let the world see. His wife Helen had her own battles, as she was increasingly unwell, both physically and emotionally. She suffered from syphilis, which was a condition that she'd contracted from her first husband. Her health had been in decline for years, and this is something that she tried to hide from all their social circles. And once the life of the party, she'd become withdrawn, erratic, and heavily dependent on prescription drugs. Their children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, all lived in a home fraught with silence and tension. But Patricia, the oldest, had dreams of becoming an actress, which was a source of deep frustration for John, because to him, theater was an immoral pursuit, and he worried about what people would think. Now, Frederick and John Jr., though younger, couldn't escape the atmosphere of gloom that hung over the family like a storm cloud. In November 1971, John List made a decision that he believed would save them all. The quiet execution of the morning of November 9th, 1971, was deceptively ordinary. John sent his children off to school like any other day, methodical as always. There were no outbursts, no arguments, just a slow, calculated ticking of a man who had already made up his mind. And after the children were safely at school, John turned his attention to his wife Helen, who sat at the kitchen table, just sipping her morning coffee. And she didn't see the gun until it was too late. John fired a single shot into the back of her head, ending her life in an instant. He moved her body to the grand ballroom, covering her with a sleeping bag, and then he walked up to the 3rd floor, where his elderly mother, Alma, resided in a small apartment. She'd always been proud of John and had helped him financially when times were tough. But John's twisted sense of mercy convinced him that she too needed to be saved, so he shot her and left her body where it fell. And later that afternoon, one by one, John's children returned home from school. Patricia was the first to arrive, and she was immediately led to the ballroom, where John also, unfortunately, executed her in the same cold, detached manner. Frederick and John Jr. followed, meeting the same fate as their sister. By the end of the day, Breeze Knoll was a tomb, silent except for the soft hum of religious hymns John had set to play on the house's intercom system. He'd arranged the bodies of his family in the ballroom, lying side by side as though they were resting. And then he sat down to write a series of letters, one to his pastor and others to extended family, explaining his decision to take their lives. John believed he had saved them from the indignity of poverty, from the humiliation of failure, and from the judgment of others. In his warped mind, this was an act of love. And with everything in place, John List walked out of Breeze Knoll, locked the door behind him, and disappeared. An empty house for nearly a month. No one suspected anything. The List family had always been somewhat reclusive, and John's carefully written letters had convinced the children, schools, and family that they were on an extended trip. But soon, the neighbors grew uneasy. The house remained dark day after day, and no one had seen any of the family members for weeks. And on December 7th of 1971, police officers were called to the property to investigate. And when they entered, what they found would shock the small, tight-knit community of Westfield. Because inside the grand ballroom, lying in perfect stillness, under sleeping bags, were the bodies of Ellen, Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. And upstairs, Alma's body remained in her apartment. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of the religious hymns still playing, and the search for John List began immediately. Authorities scoured the country, following leads and trying to trace his movements, but John had covered his tracks with meticulous precision. He had drained the family's bank accounts and vanished without a trace. Despite a nationwide manhunt, John List had simply disappeared. And for years, the List family murders became a chilling local legend. Breeze Knoll, once a symbol of his success, became a haunted monument to a family destroyed by one man's delusion. And then, in 1972, the mansion mysteriously burned to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes and the mystery of John List's whereabouts. Now, fast forward, if you will, nearly 2 decades later, and at the time there was an unassuming city named Denver, Colorado, and a quiet, middle-aged man named Robert Clark was living a peaceful, modest life. Now, Robert worked as an accountant at a small firm. He attended church, and he was well liked by his coworkers and his neighbors. People described him as being punctual, dependable, and always polite, but they described him as keeping to himself for the most part. Robert had recently married a widow named Dolores, and the two lived in a quaint home in the suburbs. Dolores admired her husband's calm demeanor and strong work ethic, and though Robert was somewhat reserved and rarely spoke about his past, she was altogether pretty content with their quiet life together. They were regulars at church, where Robert had found a community that welcomed him. Now, there was nothing remarkable about Robert Clark. He blended in seamlessly with the middle-class fabric of suburban life there in Denver. And he never drew too much attention to himself. In fact, most people would have described him as a humble, deeply religious man. Just another regular guy who lived a simple, unassuming life. He had a modest routine, and it suited him perfectly. But one night there was this television broadcast in 1989, and the story of the List family murders had faded from national consciousness at this time, but it remained a chilling reminder and a memory for the residents of Westfield. But that year, the case was given new life. New life was breathed into it by the popular TV show America's Most Wanted, and it featured an episode about the unsolved mystery and aired nationwide. And as part of the broadcast, the producers worked with a forensic artist to create an age-progressed bust of what John List might look like nearly 2 decades after he had disappeared. And the clay bust was hauntingly accurate. It depicted this man who was in his mid-60s with thinning hair, glasses, and a deeply furrowed brow. A man who had aged, but whose features were still quite unmistakable. And the program sent shockwaves through the audience. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, John List's face was back in the public eye. And in Denver, Colorado, a neighbor named Wanda Flannery watched the program with casual interest. But as the segment about the List family aired, she glanced at the clay bust on the screen and felt this jolt of recognition. Because the man depicted on her TV screen looked exactly like her neighbor Robert Clark. Now, Wanda couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, because looking at this bust, the resemblance was uncanny. It was too precise to be coincidence, at least in her mind. And after some hesitation, she finally decided to pick up the phone and call the police. And she felt unsure, she felt like maybe she was making something out of nothing, but deep down, she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. And the investigation by the police were intrigued by her tip, and, of course, they decided to investigate even further. They started looking into Robert Clark's background. And on the surface, everything seemed to be normal. He had a clean record, a stable job, he was active in his church community. But as the investigators continued to file through and dig deeper, they found gaps in his history. And these were inconsistencies that didn't add up. And it was as if Robert Clark had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. And then, after obtaining a search warrant, the authorities conducted that thorough search of Robert's home, where they had found documents revealing that Robert Clark was not who he claimed to be. It confirmed their suspicions, and his real name was in fact John List. The same John List who had vanished after murdering his family nearly 2 decades earlier. This man who had lived a quiet, unassuming life for 18 years was the very same man who had committed one of the most infamous family murders in American history. Now, when the police arrived at Robert Clark's home, to arrest him, he didn't even resist. He just simply nodded as if he'd been expecting this his entire life. And this quiet, unremarkable man who had built a new life in Denver was in fact John List, husband, father, and a cold-blooded murderer. It was a revelation that stunned both the public and especially those who knew Robert, because they thought, how could this devout, humble accountant they knew who committed these horrific acts? How had he managed to live with himself all these years, knowing that he had done these atrocious things? And at his trial in 1990, John List attempted to explain his actions, claiming that he had acted out a sense of duty to his family. And he believed that by killing them, that he had saved them from financial ruin and eternal damnation. But his defense didn't sway the jury. John List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. And there we have it, tonight's tale. First part of the week, we normally focus on true crime, whereas the second part of the week, our video is more towards the paranormal. If you guys like this setup, be sure to let me know in the comments below, and if you don't like it, be sure to let me know as well. I want to make this channel, seriously guys, without any shenanigans behind it. I want to make this channel as engaging as I can for everybody. So if you guys have any questions, if you have any recommendations, if you have any critiques, criticism, anything, literally put it in the comments. I will take note of it, and I will use that stuff to improve the channel in the future. I truly enjoy doing this stuff because I love these kinds of stories. I spend countless hours in my free time just looking up some of the most obscure cases ever. And I try to cover ones that other people haven't covered before. We have Mr. Ballin out there who is an amazing storyteller. I literally am one of the biggest Mr. Ballin fans ever. Obviously, you can tell with the like button jokes. I've had a lot of my like button suggestions used in his videos. And so I just felt that it was kind of paying homage to his style by kind of adopting that same thing. And obviously, if he liked my jokes and he used them in his, then I'm doing something right. So I hope you guys enjoy them too. If you don't, let me know that as well. I truly want to try to build a community, because as John's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, he's not releasing as much content. And although I know I'll never be able to fill his shoes, I want to do something that gives you guys something to look at and say, hey, let me take 15 or 20 minutes and sit back and listen to this story too. You know, also, if you guys haven't ever checked out this channel, please check out the Y Files. AJ is an amazing narrator. Hecklefish is hilarious. He was kind of annoying at first, but he's grown on me. So, if you guys like Mr. Ballin, if you like the kind of stories that I do, please check out the Y Files. I also have some other people on TikTok and other YouTube channels that I'll be collaborating with in the future. So be sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and give this video a like. Yeah, look down there. Take your phone right now and rotate it so it's lengthwise, and then hit the like button. You see how that rainbow little hit up? Hit the like button. There it goes again. See that? All right, guys. We'll see you on the next one. Stay brave, stay curious, and remember, the scariest stories are the ones that are all too real.